RAN virtualization and cloudification are essential in the next-gen era and will be key in optimizing network efficiency for operators. But how do we meet the scalability and flexibility requirements of the cloud RAN in a rapidly evolving 5G environment? Well, joining me to discuss the possibilities is Jane Rygaard, head of dedicated wireless networks and edge clouds at Nokia, and Chris Wright, CTO of Red Hat. Thank you both for joining us. And Chris, I want to begin with you. How is the edge different from the central cloud, if at all?
Edge is fundamentally distributed by design. So clearly cloud is centralized. There are a lot of common concepts. And I think we have learned a lot from the centralization of large clouds. One of the things we've learned is how important automation is to managing your workloads and your infrastructure. And when you take this notion of centralization, spread it out to be deeply distributed across the edge of the network, automation becomes fundamental to how you actually manage that infrastructure. And you think about the difficulties of, say, rolling a truck to a site to do something as seemingly simple as a software update or a patch. So the other thing to think about is we have to rethink a little bit, well, what is a cloud? In our context, we often think of a cloud as a cluster of servers. And when you think about the edge, an instance could be as small as a single node. We might want to still treat that as cloud-like, but it's part of a collection of other single nodes that aggregate together to build this edge presence. So similar, we learned a lot from cloud, but different because of the distributed design.
And Jane, what differences do you see?
Well, I think that it's actually a lot of what was said already in that sense. But of course, coming from the radio side as well, this need for when we talk about edge, we are closer to where the data is being used. So we also have a different behavior and latency. We have a different requirement on these things. So in that sense, there's a fundamental difference on how we need to treat the combination of network elements, in this case, radio, applications on top, and then the underlying compute, which the cloud will give us, and then this automation layer. So I think that there's a real-time aspect to the edge that we don't see in a centralized part, on top of what's already been said from Chris's point.
So Chris, what requirements does the combination of cloud RAN and edge bring to the cloud?
Well, Jane alluded to that latency need. So in this big scale-out infrastructure, which with lots of different points of presence, we need to think about treating each point of presence as part of a fleet. So in the world of virtualization, we had the special handcrafted artisan snowflake of a single virtual machine. And then ultimately we moved to more of a fleet management for virtual machines. That concept happens at the edge. And then when you look at cloud RAN, the radio access network has very unique requirements around performance, power, and then the latency and the real-time aspects of responding to, say, signaling so we don't drop calls, and ultimately looking at what we can do to support a new class of workloads will be really interesting as we bring workloads that aren't network focused to that same environment. And I know Jane has a lot of experience in this space.
Yes, Jane, what is your perspective on the requirements of the combination of cloud RAN and edge?
I think there's, of course, you can say if you come from a radio perspective, we come from a distributed world already. And then the first aspect actually, which is quite interesting, because if we talk about it from a radio perspective, we often talk about what can we do of pooling, whereas from a cloud perspective, you talk about what you can move out to the edge. So it is two worlds meeting each other. But apart from the real time aspects, this notion also of what is it, how much of the workloads can we actually make virtual, or can we containerize, and what is the requirement specifically around scheduling? So if we want to schedule the resources and I want to be able to use the spectrum that is available, then I have to perform to that requirement. I can't suddenly saying, oh, I will change the way the workload is, or I'll change how the compute is behaving, because then I will not be able to do the scheduling optimized. And then in that case, we will move from a high performing radio optimization to something that I, in a little bit rude world, would call Wi-Fi like radio, because we can't control it the same way. So when we talk about Cloud RAN ending up and looking at what is the requirements, then in the end, we need to be able to cater for radio performance, because that's what the end user of the full network is seeing. A little bit like when we on this call can discuss whether our connectivity is good enough for what we would like to do with video. Of course, we have the same part when we're providing the radio network overall, and that is really two worlds meeting each other. How do we keep the radio performance and at the same time have compute that might not be dedicated to one application? And of course, this is the world we're coming from a telco world. We are used to appliance thinking. We're used to saying that hardware and software for over 30 years have been married to each other and super optimized for the application. And this is some of the learning points we need to take when we move into Cloud RAN, and how do we make this work without breaking the radio performance?
And Chris?
I think that's a great example, Jane, of Cloud RAN brings different concepts together, and the value of partnering and bringing different skill sets together. So, from a Red Hat perspective, we understand the cloud and the infrastructure, and even enabling the hardware that's specifically needed to do the scheduling, beamforming, and real-time response that you described on the radio side. And you have all the experience in understanding what it means to provide an SLA to customers on the radio side of the network. And so bringing those two different worlds together, I think is part of the power of these new technologies coming with different perspectives, and how we can build better infrastructure together.
And Jane, you touched on it a little bit, but from where we are right now, how do you see the edge cloud evolving?
Well, you can say that the edge cloud is still young when it comes to Cloud RAN, because we talk about edge cloud, and I think that's another discussion we can probably have in a longer time. How far out is the edge, right? Because if you talk about an application edge, it doesn't need to be as far out as if you have a radio edge of a network. So in that sense, the work that has happened over the last 5 years on the radio side, we really moved from nothing to the first steps. But there's still a long way to go, because as Chris said earlier, we might need to redefine what a cloud is. We can look at, if I build a cloud only for radio, is it then really a cloud in a stricter terminology? No, because I won't have the same behavior, but I might not need it. So we're still early in the definition. We have things up and running. We can deploy them, but there's still a lot of learnings to do. As we also move forward and saying, I don't only want a standard radio, I want to be able to use the cloud functionality and the properties of having a cloud. What can I do then better? And specifically on 5G, when it comes to UILLC, we need to have low latency. I need to have ultra reliable. Can I start thinking a different way of doing this when I'm built on the cloud? So early days and much more to go, and definitely a lot of partnerships needed, because as Chris said, this is two worlds coming together. And unlike in a centralized manner, you can't just, because of physics, I can't just apply all cloud rules to the edge by day one.
And Chris, what is your perspective on edge cloud evolution?
Well, I'd start with edge means different things to different people. And so, we're talking here about the radio access network. So that's the edge of the telecommunications network. From an enterprise perspective, you might define the edge differently. And so part of the evolution of the edge and the edge cloud is understanding what are those use cases, what are the actual deployment locations, and how do we connect it all together? And so you can take some examples of, as Jane mentioned, maybe the application piece can be closer in, but certainly the radio access network needs to be at the edge of the network. And then what use cases need to be perhaps co-located, so that evolution of the cloud from focused on a specific use case, enabling the radio access network, to focused on maybe an enterprise use case that needs close co-location to that radio access network. For example, maybe a private 5G deployment, and you're trying to take advantage of that low latency from an application point of view to deliver automated manufacturing where there's functional safety requirements on the factory floor, as just one example. So there's a whole evolution in the technology, but also an evolution in the use cases, and trying to understand when it means so many different things to different people, how do we get some commonality?
And layered on top of that, it seems that customers are looking for choice when it comes to cloud providers, and sometimes they're looking to work with multiple vendors. So, how do you see this cooperation working, and what roles will Nokia and Red Hat play both individually and together? Jane, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think we said earlier, right? We all have our expertise area, and a key part of bringing that together is that we need to make sure that we as an industry take the best of all of it. So we play the role for Nokia. Of course, we bring in this fundamental 5G knowledge, the knowledge of how to not only have the applications in terms of network functions, but also how do we optimize these functions on top in connection with the wider network. So I think that from our point of view, we definitely bring in a very clear telco view and telco knowledge in this world. And then we have to rely on the wider industry and our partners to make sure how do we make that work in a world that is also an edge. And as Chris said, when use cases becomes different, when we move into an enterprise space where co-locating of network functions and applications, it puts different requirements and different parts into the network, but also what we need to be able to open up for to sharing of data in order to optimize the applications on top. So I would say we all bring separate things to the table, but it really only works if we're in it together.
And Chris, what roles do you think Nokia and Red Hat will play individually and together?
Well, certainly from a Red Hat perspective, we're bringing that expertise in the underlying cloud platform. So partially that's tapping into the innovation stream that comes out of open source communities, stabilizing that and making it accessible to a broad customer base. And then working with key partners like Nokia to bring their expertise in the radio access network to combine with our expertise in the underlying platform to really think in maybe two different dimensions from a business outcomes point of view. One, we're bringing this innovation. We need to help providers of networks reduce their costs of operations because these are big, expensive networks to build and maintain. So the automation becomes a really important part there. But also with our expertise in enterprise and enterprise applications and our relationship to enterprise businesses, where can we see with this choice and collection of best of breed components to build the network, where do we see the opportunity to help operators or communication service providers provide new value and create new streams of revenue as they build these networks to tap into enterprise businesses that are looking to manage their data and satisfy their desire to be data driven and create real-time insights into their business. So I think it's a really interesting combination of skill sets, and part of it means we have to work closely together to make that integrated experience feel similar to what you had in the past where it was truly an appliance. And today we want to create flexibility with cloud platforms and different types of applications coming together, but we can't sacrifice the operational experience. So a really awesome challenge. And I think we see a couple of different ways that we come together to bring expertise to bear to this problem domain.
And Chris, as we're wrapping up, tell us one market-related trend that you're watching closely.
Well, actually, you asked for one. I'm going to have to give you two, and I'll make a connection between the two. So as I mentioned, when you look at this distributed infrastructure, and Jane even described that moving compute closer to the producers and consumers of data, data is this fundamental central actor in the whole picture here. Data leads to machine learning and AI, and we're trying to build smarter infrastructure, smarter buildings, smarter cities, all of the things that we can generate insights and create value from this rich vein of data that we have in all the businesses. And then you can take that and say, well, we hear a lot about the metaverse. The metaverse will have this immersive reality piece. That's a big piece of connecting data to the producers and consumers. And really, how does this, what are the implications on the technology to kind of make sure we're building something that meets the needs of the world around us? And I think ultimately this has real societal impacts or implications on how we connect as people and how we operate as businesses.
And Jane, what market trend or trends are you watching closely?
So I think that what I want to add, because that's the beauty of being the one who's been asked second, right? I can always say that one part of it has already been said. But I think that there's one key aspect that we need to take into account here, and that's really the sustainability and the energy efficiency of what we're doing at the same time. Because as these services evolve, um, and as the data is being used, we have to ensure that we also optimize and use the data for being optimizing how we use compute, where we use it, so we can optimize the energy consumption. And of course, from a mobile networks perspective, that is really key. Plus the fact that if you look into the mobile networks, it is the radio network that is the biggest part of consuming this energy. So as we're building the edge and we're building a room for using the edge as compute for radio, we also need to take this energy efficiency into play. And of course, if we can avoid moving data always all the way back to a centralized cloud, of course I can save some transport costs, therefore also some energy cost in transporting it. But at the same time, I have to make sure that I also optimize how I use the edge the right way from a consumption point of view of energy, because otherwise we are going to be ending up with a problem that we can't actually feed the network. We can't use the network because there's not going to be enough electricity to feed it with. So I think that this green debate on how we do things in a sustainable way very much addresses also the edge, and even more so when I need to come from a, as I said, a radio that has been super optimized for 30 years, also from an energy efficiency point of view. So the marriage of this on the edge for me has a very big clear part that we need to make sure that it becomes sustainable in the long run as well.
And Chris, you had a final thought?
That's an awesome point. It's a good example of how we work together. We think in terms of leveraging the hardware features that reduce power consumption, but also coming from the perspective of cloud native design. How can we influence applications, network applications, to turn off when you don't use it, which is what we expect in clouds, and how we can reduce power consumption in the radio access network on the edge.
Well, we are just scratching the surface of this topic. And Jane and Chris, thank you so much for sharing your insights on the evolution of Cloud RAN. And thank you for watching.